It's really wonderful to be here this morning. I want to thank those who brought us all together today. It was a really wonderful day yesterday, inspiring. I do want to make one little announcement that Bill Gates owns PowerPoint, and I'm not going to try to compete with him. This is going to be a little bit academic style. Of course, this is the picture that underlies the reason why many of us are here. It is climate change, as we just saw in the film. And this is unique, I think, among the challenges that we're facing, because what's happening is not linear, it's accelerating, and we are hitting tipping points that are becoming irreversible, like the melting of the permafrost, opening up of the Arctic Ocean, which sets us off on a vicious circle downward, and without really clear ways to break this. So this is, again, happening rapidly, much faster than many of us thought just a few decades ago. I find it helpful to look at this picture put together by the IPCC at the pathway that we need to follow if we're going to stay under 2 degrees centigrade by the end of the century. And it's important to appreciate that very roughly, and none of these numbers are perfect, most of the greenhouse gas emissions are coming from fossil fuel production, and we need to get those to virtually zero as rapidly as we can. The food sector is next most important. Now, what's shown there, that orange band, isn't everything. That's the direct emissions, but that doesn't include the energy that's put into the food sector and production of fertilizers, things like that. And it also doesn't include the change in land use that's happening by cutting down forests, plowing up prairies that are big sources of emission, as well as eliminating carbon sinks. And as you can see that black line, if we continue on our business as usual track, we'll about double the greenhouse gas emissions from the food system by 2050. And no matter how much, even if we eliminate all fossil fuel consumption, we still can't stay within 2 degrees warming. And then there's that big green space at the bottom there. That's the negative emissions, presumably mostly from the agricultural sector and forest. And one of the problems with that is that's almost wishful thinking, that we don't know exactly how to do that, and yet we're counting on that to keep us under 2 degrees. So we need to have, I think, a really massive investments in agricultural research to know how to do this, to sequester the carbon, to keep it sequestered. As was mentioned, I'm going to talk primarily about the work we did in developing the recommendations from the Eat-Lancet Commission. Fortunately, Wellcome Trust funded this. It let us bring together 35 scientists from 17 different countries from many disciplines. And this was something that no single person, no single group could do on their own. And it was a real privilege to work on this project, something I'd been wanting to do for quite a while. After about 3 years of reviewing research in diet and health, from small feeding studies up to large-scale epidemiologic studies, we came up with what we called the reference diet, or planetary health diet, as we've also called it. And very roughly, it's about half of our plate from fruits and vegetables, and there's still a lot to learn about which fruits and vegetables are especially important. Whole grains, mostly plant sources of protein, healthy fats, just a little bit of sugar if we want it, and then a modest amount of animal source foods. But there's flexibility about it, and we've called this also a flexitarian diet. The numbers for those animal source foods, after playing with lots of values, and it really boils down to something pretty simple, which is 1 + 1, about 1 serving of dairy a day and 1 serving of other animal source proteins, such as poultry, fish, but red meat not more than about once per week. And if you wanted to be a vegan, that's also possible, or something in between. But if we go much beyond 1 serving of dairy a day and 1 serving of other animal source protein a day, we couldn't stay within the planetary boundaries for greenhouse gas emissions and other environmental impacts. But there's many ways to put this together on a plate. We're now in the process of doing an update on the Eat-Lancet Commission, and just very roughly, we are still, like we did the first time, going to be emphasizing, doesn't show up very much here, this arrow, food systems going to health. That's what I just described primarily, and food system affecting the environment and finding a way to stay within planetary boundaries. That those are the environmental limits. Of course, we've heard about already how environment affects food systems. That's important. We're going to add a little bit there, and also the fact that food systems can act indirectly by influencing the environment and then influencing health. There's, of course, many ways that that can happen, but we still are going to be paying the main attention to this, which is the biggest direct impact of food systems on health. And then, of course, there's the justice inequality issue that we will be dealing with more, which was more or less implicit in the first report, but we'll be dealing with that a little bit more directly. One of the exercises that we're able to do now that we did define a planetary health diet or reference diet quantitatively, we can look at the question of if people follow that, what is the impact on health and what is the impact on environment? And for this, we've used our large cohort studies where we have over 200,000 men and women that we've been following since 1980, updating their diet every 4 years over time, tracking all major diseases as well as mortality. And we can then score the diets of each of those persons over that time period of over 30 years at this point in time, and then look at how that relates to mortality. And so here this is deciles of adherence to the planetary health diet. The higher deciles means they're closer to the planetary health diet reference numbers. And at the top, this is women, and you can see the top decile, there's about a 30% lower total mortality for those who adhere to the diet most closely compared to the bottom decile. And this is adjusted for smoking, physical activity, pretty much everything else that we could think of that would affect total mortality. And to my amazement, we looked at every type of mortality, neurodegenerative disease, of course, cardiovascular mortality, pulmonary disease, infectious disease, and all of those were significantly lower with those who adhered best to the planetary health diet. There were, again, this was over 54,000 people who had died during this follow-up period, so we had a lot of statistical precision, as you can see there. And the same thing in men at the bottom, virtually identical results. We could also look at the greenhouse gas emissions and other environmental footprints and how they related to adherence to the planetary health diet. So those in the top 20% had about 29% lower greenhouse gas emissions from their diets compared to the bottom 20%. According to adherence to the planetary health diet. Fertilizer use is less, but what impressed me most was 51% lower cropland use. And that's basically because we're not needing, so if we're eating less beef, less dairy foods, we need a lot less cropland to produce the maize and soy that's being fed to those animals. And if you look at the Midwest in the United States, it is corn and soy, soy and corn and soy, as far as you can see. And less irrigation water, although that was some, not as dramatically less as the others, because we also would be producing more fruits and vegetables, which do require, in many places, irrigation water. So huge benefits on both food and environment, a real double win. What we'll be emphasizing more in the second Eat-Lancet report is translation of the planetary health diets to different regions and countries around the world. And the best place to start usually is with the traditional diets, because most of those are actually not very far from the planetary health diet. But they're being lost by industrialization in almost every country around the world. So just for example, this is a food meal consistent with a traditional Vietnamese diet, lots of fruits and vegetables, plant sources of protein mainly. One little tweak we did make is that instead of white rice, there's brown rice. That's important. There's almost no perfect diet around the world. In fact, we could see that no country came close to having an ideal diet at this point in time. So there's room for improvement everywhere, and sometimes important small differences like that, but that really do take some cultural change are important. Just one example, and we're working on many. One area where there's been a lot of interest is replacements or alternatives to meat and dairy foods. Ideally, we don't need these. We can actually provide healthy and sustainable diets with the foods we have, but for some people, it's a hard shift to make the changes quickly that we need to make quickly. And there's been meats that you've heard about, Impossible Burger, Beyond Burger up there, and I think actually a lot more progress on the dairy side of it in some sense. But there's problems that those meat products cost way more than beef does, and so that's not going to be close to a good solution as it is in the way the pricing structure is. And I think there's real need for healthy, a lot of other options there for red meat replacements that maybe aren't perfectly trying to mimic red meat, but still are something that people would really enjoy and value. On the milk side, though, I looked at the shelves the other day, maybe several hundred options out there. But one of the things we do need is simple studies to look at the at least short-term effects on these various factors, on risk factors, because of course, the meat and dairy industry are saying, well, those are ultra-processed, don't trust them, we don't know what they do. We do need more studies like this. This is a small randomized trial looking at, actually it was Beyond Burger versus the plant alternative, Beyond Burger versus traditional red meat. And here there was about a 10% reduction in LDL cholesterol, a very strong risk factor for heart disease. This would imply a 30% reduction in coronary heart disease incidence if the meals were all replacing red meat with this plant alternative. There was also some change in other important risk factors as well. So we need that, I think, for comparing different milks with cow milk, as well as different alternatives to red meat. That's just one simple piece of science that would be quite helpful in promoting this transition, at least in some markets. Finally, I just want to emphasize that we are facing this polycrisis. It's extremely complex, and I think we all understand there's no simple answer, but rather we need to do lots of things in lots of places. And I find, and my students find this helpful in thinking about what they might do. Now a few years ago we had to convince them there's a problem. Now they know there's a problem, and they're all saying, what can I do? And sometimes that's a little hard to answer, but I made this matrix to point out that we need to have actions in multiple sectors, schools and childcare. We heard about that already. So we feed children healthy foods that they enjoy, and they also learn about why they are healthy. Healthcare, mainly we've been missing in action. The medical schools don't teach this, but we don't really do much about nutrition in healthcare at all, unfortunately. Work sites, more is being done there because employers get that this is important. Food environment, and there we need the culinary, the chef world in food services have healthy, desirable, attractive foods that people want to eat and that are both healthy and sustainable. Built environment for improving physical activity. Mass media, which now is dominated by promotion of junk food and without any restraint. Research and education, of course, that's where we are, that's our life. And then the economic levers that might help move us in the right direction. And Dr. Nugent will talk about that. And then we need action at every level. So ideally, we'd like to have enlightened global leadership that was powerful and could make everything happen the way we'd like to. Unfortunately, that we heard yesterday, that's not the way the world is. And for so many things, we need to work from the bottom up to make things ultimately happen at the levels where they need to happen in the long run. And so just individual action in our own families, I think is quite important because we learn where the barriers are and can set examples at the family, community, state, national, local, global. And so wherever someone is, if they understand what the big picture is and where we need to go, they can take action and help promote change. Let me stop here, and I'm going to be really interested to hear what my co-panel members have to say about this. Thank you.